September 3rd, 1944. German defensive positions near Metz, France. Oberst Heinrich Aberbach lowered his field glasses, disbelief etched across his face as he watched yet another convoy of American trucks thunder past on the horizon. His intelligence officer stood beside him, holding the morning reconnaissance report with trembling hands. Herr Oberst, our observers counted 847 trucks on the main supply route yesterday, the lieutenant said. That's impossible. The Americans were stationary just 4 days ago. Their forward elements were reporting critical fuel shortages. Aberbach had commanded Wehrmacht forces through the brutal retreat from Normandy. He'd witnessed the collapse of the Falaise pocket, survived the route through France, and repositioned his battered regiment to defend the approaches to the German border. Throughout those nightmare weeks, one constant had given him hope. American logistics would fail. Every calculation, every projection showed it was mathematically impossible for the Allies to sustain their breakneck advance. The mathematics were simple, brutal, undeniable. 28 Allied divisions consuming 12,500 tons of supplies daily. Every ton travelling 340 miles from Normandy beaches to forward positions. The French rail network destroyed by Allied bombing. No pipelines operational, only trucks and not enough of them. German intelligence had calculated that the American advance must culminate by late August. Their logistics simply couldn't keep pace. Patton's Third Army, racing toward the German border at 40 miles per day, was writing operational checks their supply lines couldn't possibly cash. Within days, perhaps a week, the American spearhead would grind to a halt, giving Wehrmacht forces precious time to retreat, regroup, and establish defensive positions along the Siegfried Line. Our projections showed they could deliver perhaps 8,000 tons daily at maximum effort. The intelligence officer continued, consulting his notes. Current observations suggest they're somehow delivering over 12,000 tons. The convoys never stop. They operate through the night without lights. The same trucks we observe going forward loaded appear returning empty within 36 hours. Aberbach studied the distant convoy through his binoculars again. Red circular markings visible on every vehicle. American military police directing traffic at every intersection. A one-way highway stretching from Normandy to the front lines, operating with mechanical precision that shouldn't be possible given the constraints. In Berlin, Wehrmacht logistics staff were frantically recalculating their projections. Field Marshal Walter Model, commanding German forces in the West, received the disturbing reports with growing alarm. The Americans weren't just maintaining their advance, they were accelerating it. Fuel that should have run out days ago kept flowing. Ammunition that should have been exhausted kept arriving. The Allied offensive that was, supposed to collapse from its own momentum, showed no signs of slowing. How? Model demanded of his logistics officers. Show me the mathematics. Explain to me how they're delivering tonnage that exceeds every projection by 40%. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The German staff had no answers. Their calculations were correct. American logistics should have failed. The fact that it hadn't meant something fundamental had changed something the Germans hadn't anticipated and couldn't explain. What the Germans didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that 1 week earlier, a radical transportation method had been implemented that violated every rule in the military logistics manual, a system so unconventional, so dangerous, that when first proposed, senior American officers had declared it operationally suicidal. August 20th, 1944. Third Army Headquarters, Verdun, France. Lieutenant Colonel George Blakesley studied the morning fuel report with mounting desperation. The numbers told a story of impending catastrophe. Patton's armoured divisions were consuming 400,000 gallons of gasoline per day. Current delivery rate, 32,000 gallons daily. Through his field glasses, Blakesley watched Sherman tanks across the French countryside begin to slow. Engines coughed, treads ground to reluctant halts. 40 miles from the German border, America's most aggressive general was being defeated not by Wehrmacht divisions but by empty fuel tanks. The situation was even worse than the Germans suspected. American logistics weren't just stressed, they were collapsing. Every projection showed that within 72 hours, forward elements would be completely immobilized. The Allied breakout, the most successful offensive in modern warfare, would culminate not from enemy resistance, but from logistical failure. In London, General Eisenhower's logistics staff calculated the cascading catastrophe. At current delivery rates, the offensive would stop within days. The German army, reeling from devastating losses at Falaise, would receive exactly what they desperately needed: time. Time to retreat to the Siegfried Line, time to regroup, time to fortify, time to transform a rout into a stalemate. The war, predicted to end by Christmas, could drag on for years. Major General John C.H. Lee, commander of the communications zone, stared at the same impossible numbers in his headquarters. A career army engineer who built his reputation on careful planning and orthodox military procedure, everything in his training told him the situation was mathematically impossible. You cannot supply 28 divisions across 340 miles of damaged French roads with broken-down trucks driven by minimally trained personnel. The infrastructure didn't exist. The rail network lay in ruins, deliberately destroyed by Allied bombers before D-Day to prevent German reinforcements. The carefully engineered supply pipelines wouldn't be operational for months. But what Lee didn't know, what none of his West Point-trained logistics officers crowding his headquarters could predict, was that in 72 hours, a radical proposal from an unlikely source would completely overturn every assumption about what was logistically possible. The Allied supply crisis wasn't supposed to happen. For 2 years, American military planners had conducted Operation Bolero, the largest logistical build-up in history. Over 1 million tons of supplies monthly flowed into British ports. Everything calculated, everything measured, everything rehearsed, except the one variable that mattered. The Allied breakout from Normandy exceeded every projection by 200 days. Patton's Third Army and General Courtney Hodges's First Army weren't supposed to be racing across France in August. They were supposed to be grinding through Normandy hedgerows in October. The entire logistics timeline, rail reconstruction, pipeline construction, port capture, was calibrated for a slow, methodical advance. Instead, after the German 7th Army collapsed at the Falaise pocket, American forces exploded eastward at 40 miles per day, and the entire supply system shattered under the strain. The first solution seemed obvious. Rebuild the French rail network. Army engineers rushed forward with repair crews, but the scale of destruction was overwhelming. Allied bombers had systematically destroyed every major rail bridge in northern France. Repair crews found demolished locomotives, twisted track, collapsed tunnels. Even with round-the-clock shifts, engineers estimated months before the first supply train could reach Paris. The second solution: complete the fuel pipeline from Normandy. The Pluto pipeline could theoretically pump 600,000 gallons daily straight to the front, but construction required specialized equipment, technical expertise, and, above all, time. By mid-August, with Patton's tanks already sputtering to a stop, engineers had barely completed 40 miles of pipeline. The 300-mile system wouldn't be operational until October. The third solution: aerial resupply. American cargo planes began emergency flights, delivering ammunition and gasoline directly to forward airfields. But the numbers were pathetic. Even flying maximum sorties, C-47 Skytrains, could deliver perhaps 1,000 tons daily. The armies needed 12,500. The expert consensus was unanimous and devastating. The Allied advance must halt. General Bradley's staff calculated that First Army and Third Army must consolidate positions, shorten supply lines, and wait perhaps 4 to 6 weeks for rail and pipeline infrastructure to catch up. In London, British logistics officers proposed shutting down Patton's Third Army entirely, redirecting all available supplies to Montgomery's forces in the north. Patton's advance is operationally brilliant, but logistically suicidal, one British colonel declared. His tanks are writing checks, his supply lines cannot cash. The stakes couldn't be higher. Intelligence reports flooded into Shaef headquarters, showing German forces in full retreat, but not yet destroyed. Wehrmacht divisions were streaming back toward the Siegfried Line, Germany's massive defensive fortifications along the western border. If those fortifications were fully manned and supplied, the war would transform from a pursuit into a siege. General Eisenhower's chief intelligence officer estimated the cost. Every week we give them is worth 10 divisions to the Germans. If we stop now, we could face another year of warfare. Perhaps 100,000 additional Allied casualties. Perhaps more. By August 28, Patton's the 12th Corps reported 140,000 gallons of fuel on hand, enough for 1 day of operations. The 4th Armored Division, America's most lethal tank formation, sat motionless in fields near Chalon-sur-Marne. Crews performed maintenance, infantry units walked patrols, and the German army slipped away toward the safety of the Siegfried Line. In headquarters across France, staff officers reached the same grim conclusion. The Germans hadn't stopped the Allied advance. Hitler's vaunted Wehrmacht hadn't stopped it. The Siegfried Line hadn't stopped it. Logistics had stopped it. And unless someone devised a solution in the next 72 hours, the war would shift from pursuit to stalemate. What the Germans watching from their defensive positions couldn't know was that American desperation was about to produce innovation. The window for ending the European war in 1944 was closing. It would take an idea so radical, so dangerous, that every transportation expert in the European theatre would call it suicidal. An idea that would come not from West Point graduates or staff college theorists, but from a civilian truck driver who understood that sometimes the textbook solution to an impossible problem is to ignore the textbook entirely. And in just 3 days, that idea would transform the equation. The convoys the Germans were watching with such disbelief weren't operating under conventional military doctrine. They were operating under a revolutionary new system that would be studied by military logisticians for generations to come, a system born from desperation, implemented over fierce objections, and successful beyond anyone's wildest projections. The Red Ball Express was about to begin, and nothing in German military planning had prepared them for what was coming. August 23rd, 1944. A dusty French barn, 15 miles behind Allied lines. Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Haynes sat at a makeshift desk, studying supply convoy reports by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. At 37 years old, balding with the permanent squint of a man who'd driven too many miles in too much sun, Haynes looked nothing like the typical army officer who might change the course of the war. He wasn't supposed to be the man who solved the greatest logistics crisis in American military history. He wasn't a West Point graduate, he wasn't a career army officer, he wasn't even a transportation specialist. Before Pearl Harbor, Gordon Haynes had driven trucks for a commercial hauling company in Ohio, long-distance freight, overnight routes, tight delivery schedules. The Army drafted him in 1942, gave him a commission based on civilian experience, and assigned him to the Motor Transport Service because they needed warm bodies more than credentials. By August 1944, Haynes commanded a quartermaster truck company operating supply runs from Normandy beaches to forward depots. His men called him Ohio. It was all anyone knew about his background. No combat decorations, no command school credentials, no connections to anyone who mattered. Just a civilian trucker with Lieutenant Colonel oak leaves. But on this particular evening, reviewing the official supply projections showing 132 truck companies could deliver perhaps 8,000 tons daily to the front, something clicked in Haynes's mind. The projections were based on standard Army transportation protocol. Convoys operate daylight hours only, trucks stop for meals and maintenance at designated intervals, drivers rotate every 8 hours, vehicles park overnight at secure locations. Gordon Haynes, who'd spent 15 years driving commercial freight across America, knew exactly why those numbers were wrong. He'd seen this problem before. Back in 1938, when Ohio trucking companies faced a crisis delivering automobile parts to Detroit assembly lines, the solution wasn't bigger trucks or better roads. It was operational tempo. The civilian companies that survived the Depression weren't the ones with the fanciest equipment. They were the ones that ran 24-hour operations, eliminated downtime, and kept wheels rolling. Haynes pulled out a map of France and traced the route from Cherbourg to Chartres, 340 miles. Under current Army protocol, a convoy completed one, round trip every 3 to 4 days. But what if you eliminated the stops? What if you eliminated the overnight parking? What if you eliminated everything except 10-minute breaks and driver swaps? He ran the numbers. A truck that never stopped, a truck that ran 24 hours a day on a continuous loop, could complete the round trip in 36 hours, could deliver twice the tonnage, could transform 132 truck companies from an 8,000-ton-per-day operation into a 15,000-ton-per-day operation. His junior officers would later remember that moment. Haynes, looking up from his calculations, face illuminated by lamplight, saying 5 words, "We run them like railroads." The next morning, August 24th, Gordon Haynes requested an urgent meeting with the Motor Transport Division Chief. He'd drafted a proposal, a dedicated one-way continuous operation highway for emergency supply delivery. No scheduled stops, no overnight parking, 24-hour operations, convoys running in a closed loop like a railroad system, except using trucks instead of trains. His commanding officer read the proposal. Read it again. Then looked at Haynes like he'd suggested invading Berlin on bicycles. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said slowly, "this violates 17 separate articles of the Army Transportation Manual. What happened next isn't in the official after-action reports." For 3 days, August 24th through 26th, Gordon Haynes effectively went rogue. He couldn't get approval through channels. The Motor Transport Division dismissed his proposal as operationally reckless. The Quartermaster Corps called it a guaranteed method for destroying equipment and killing drivers. Every transportation expert with a college degree explained why continuous operation convoys couldn't work, so Haynes decided to prove them wrong. He commandeered 6 trucks from his own company, 6 GMC, Jimmy, 2.5-ton cargo carriers, and hand-picked 12 drivers who'd worked commercial freight before the war. Men who understood that sometimes you drove through the night to make a delivery. Men who knew that if you wanted to survive in the Depression-era trucking business, you learned to operate on 4 hours of sleep and cold coffee. On the night of August 24th, in a commandeered French barn, Haynes ran his first test. He established the protocol that would later become famous: trucks marked with red identification discs, one-way traffic only, mandatory 10-minute break every hour, driver swaps without stopping the vehicle, no overnight parking. His maintenance sergeant jury-rigged a refueling station where trucks could take on fuel without shutting down engines. His supply clerk organized pre-loaded cargo, so drivers never waited more than 20 minutes for turnaround. Then Haynes sent his 6 trucks on a 340-mile loop Normandy to Chartres and back with orders to not stop except for the hourly 10-minute breaks. 31 hours later, all 6 trucks returned. Exhausted drivers, engines running rough, but 15 tons of ammunition delivered per truck, and every vehicle ready to roll again after quick maintenance. The unofficial test proved the concept worked barely. The drivers reported extreme fatigue, near accidents, and maintenance issues that would have grounded the trucks under normal operations. But they'd completed a round trip in 31 hours, half the time of standard convoy operations. Haynes ran the calculations again. If 6 trucks could deliver 90 tons in 31 hours, then 6,000 trucks could deliver 90,000 tons per week. The math worked. The concept worked. The only thing that didn't work was convincing the Army it wasn't insane. On August 25th, Haynes submitted his test results along with a revised proposal. This time he bypassed the Motor Transport Division entirely and sent it directly to Major General Frank Ross, Chief of Transportation for the European Theatre. The response came back within hours. "Report to ComZ headquarters immediately. General Lee wants to see you." Gordon Haynes drove to headquarters, expecting a reprimand for conducting unauthorized operations. Instead, He walked into a room filled with 2-star generals, full colonels, and the entire senior logistics staff of the European Theatre of Operations. General Lee tossed Haynes's proposal onto the conference table. "Lieutenant Colonel Haynes," Lee said, "I've received 17 separate memoranda in the last 6 hours, explaining why your convoy method is impossible, illegal, and guaranteed to fail." He paused. "So let's hear you defend it." The briefing room at ComZ headquarters represented everything Gordon Haynes wasn't. Ivy League graduates, staff officers with master's degrees in engineering, transportation planners who'd studied logistics at Command and General Staff College, men with ribbons from North Africa and Sicily campaigns. And then there was Ohio, a former truck driver standing at attention, defending an idea that violated 17 Army regulations. Colonel William Bradford, Chief of the Motor Transport Division, spoke first. "General, I've reviewed Lieutenant Colonel Haynes's proposal. It's operationally irresponsible. The 10-minute break schedule provides inadequate rest. Running convoys at night without proper lighting invites accidents. The continuous operation schedule will destroy vehicles designed for intermittent use. We'll lose half the trucks to mechanical failure within a week." Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, a Princeton-educated logistics officer, stood next. "Sir, I've calculated the accident rates based on current traffic density and the proposed 24-hour operations. We're looking at a 40% increase in traffic accidents. The French road network cannot support continuous two-way traffic with military vehicles. We'll create gridlock." A third officer raised the maintenance issue. "General, Army trucks require daily maintenance checks. The Lieutenant Colonel's proposal eliminates scheduled maintenance entirely. We'll have broken-down vehicles abandoned across 340 miles of French countryside. The logistics of recovery alone will overwhelm our motor pools." Gordon Haynes stood silent through the barrage, watching careers much more prestigious than his explain why his idea would fail. Then General Lee nodded at him. "Lieutenant Colonel Haynes, respond." Haynes stepped to the map table. "Sir, everything these officers said is correct. By normal standards, this operation should fail." He paused. "But normal standards assume we have time. We don't. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story." He pointed to the frontline markers. Third Army consumed 400,000 gallons yesterday, received 32,000. Tomorrow, General Patton's most advanced units will be stationary. Day after tomorrow, German forces complete their withdrawal to the Siegfried Line. Day after that, we're fighting World War I, again siege warfare against fortifications. Colonel Bradford interrupted. "We understand the urgency, Lieutenant Colonel, but destroying our transportation assets in a reckless gamble isn't—" "It's not a gamble, sir." Haynes pulled out his test data. "I ran it. 6 trucks, 340 miles, 31-hour turnaround, all 6 vehicles operational. It works because we're not asking trucks to do something they can't do. We're asking drivers to do something they can." The room erupted. "You ran unauthorized operations. Those test results are statistically meaningless. 6 trucks don't prove feasibility for 6,000. Haynes raised his voice over the chaos. "In 1938, I drove for Patterson Freight in Ohio. We ran Cleveland to Detroit every night, 237 miles, 3 runs per week. Same drivers, same trucks. Not because Army manuals said we could, but because the Depression said we had to." He looked around the room. "Everyone in here has degrees in logistics. I've got 15 years of getting freight, delivered when textbooks said it was impossible. Colonel Bradford, if we implement Lieutenant Colonel Haynes's method, what's your worst-case projection?" Bradford consulted his notes. "Sir, worst case, 30% vehicle attrition within 2 weeks, 15% personnel casualties from fatigue-related accidents, complete operational failure by mid-September. And if we don't implement it?" "Sir, if we maintain current delivery rates, forward elements will be immobilized within 72 hours. Lee turned to Haynes. "Lieutenant Colonel, You're asking me to risk the entire motor transport service on a method that violates safety regulations, exhausts personnel, and will likely destroy half our vehicles? Yes, sir. And you believe it will deliver 12,000 tons per day? Yes, sir. For 60 days, maybe 90. Then we transition to rail. Lee walked to the window overlooking the motor pool. Hundreds of GMC trucks parked in neat rows, ready for conventional operations. He stood there for nearly a minute while the room waited. Then he turned. Colonel Bradford, you'll organize 132 truck companies for continuous operations beginning 0600 tomorrow, one-way traffic lanes from Normandy to Chartres. Maintenance stations every 80 miles, MP traffic control at all major intersections. He looked at Haynes. Lieutenant Colonel Haynes, you'll serve as operational coordinator. This is your concept. Make it work. Bradford stiffened. Sir, for the record, I must state my opposition. Noted. But General Patton's tanks don't run on regulations, Colonel. They run on gasoline. Dismissed. As the room cleared, Lee pulled Haynes aside. Lieutenant Colonel, if this fails, it'll be the biggest logistics disaster in American military history. Careers will end, including yours. Haynes nodded. And if it succeeds, sir? Lee almost smiled. Then you'll have invented the future of military logistics. No pressure. Within 18 hours, the Red Ball Express would begin operations, and the Germans watching from their defensive positions would witness something their military planning had never anticipated. American logistics achieving the impossible through the simple expedient of ignoring every rule about what was possible. August 25th, 1944, 0600 hours, the Red Ball Express begins. The name came from railroad terminology. Red Ball Freight meant priority express service. Someone in the motor transport division painted red circles on the first trucks, and the name stuck. Within hours, every vehicle bore the Red Ball identification disc. Every road sign along the route displayed Red Ball markers. Every MP checkpoint knew Red Ball traffic had absolute priority. The first convoy, 67 truck companies, 3,858 vehicles departed Cherbourg and Saint-Lô hauling 4,482 tons of supplies. Destination: forward supply depots at Chartres, 340 miles east. The route cut through destroyed French villages, past burned-out German tanks, over hastily repaired bridges, one-way traffic only, no civilian vehicles, no unauthorized military traffic. The Red Ball Highway belonged to the supply trucks. In German defensive positions near Metz, Oberst Heinrich Aberbach watched the first convoys roll past and immediately knew something had changed. The Americans weren't operating like any military force he'd ever encountered. The trucks moved with industrial precision, spaced exactly 60 yards apart, maintaining constant speed, never stopping except for brief intervals at designated control points. Herr Oberst, his intelligence officer reported, the convoy has been continuous for 6 hours. The same route, one direction only. We've counted over 400 vehicles, and they're still coming. Aberbach grabbed his field telephone and contacted division headquarters. Request immediate clarification. Are the Americans implementing a new supply doctrine? The convoy density exceeds anything in our intelligence assessments. The response from division was equally baffled. All sectors reporting similar observations. American supply traffic has increased approximately 200% in the last 12 hours. Cause unknown. Continue monitoring. What the Germans were witnessing was the impossible made real. The Red Ball Express wasn't just delivering supplies, it was rewriting the rules of military logistics in real time. The testing data came fast and brutal. First 24 hours, 4,482 tons delivered. 18 trucks broke down, 7 traffic accidents, 2 serious. 90 drivers reported to medical tents complaining of exhaustion. But 4,482 tons reached the front double the previous day's delivery. Technical Sergeant David Wilson of the 398th Quartermaster Truck Company kept a detailed log of his first Red Ball run, hour 0 to 2, loaded ammunition at Normandy Depot, departed 0615 hours. Hour 2 to 8, continuous driving, 10-minute break each hour. Driver swap at hour 4 without stopping engine. Second, driver took over while truck rolled at 5 mph per hour. Procedure awkward but functional. Hour 8 to 14. Night driving without lights, east of blackout line. Nearly impossible navigation. Following tail lights of truck ahead. MP checkpoints every 20 miles guide traffic. Hour 14 to 17. Arrived forward depot under sporadic German artillery fire. Unloaded while under fire. Reloaded empty jerrycans for return trip. Turnaround time. 43 minutes. Hour 17 to 31. Return convoy. Stopped twice for roadside maintenance. Arrived Normandy Depot at 1,347 hours. Vehicle operational. Crew exhausted. Wilson's log entry concluded. Never thought delivering cargo could be this dangerous. But if it gets ammunition to the infantry, it's worth every mile. First week statistics told the story. Daily average climbed to 6,000 tons, but the casualties mounted. Private James McKinley drove 41 straight hours, collapsed during a refueling stop, spent 2 days in field hospital. Sergeant Emmanuel Green of the Plymouth 398th fell asleep at the wheel after 52 consecutive hours, crashed into a convoy ahead of him, killed instantly. The experts who predicted failure weren't wrong about the costs. They were wrong about whether the costs were acceptable. By August 29th, just 4 days after operations began, the Red Ball Express had mushroomed to 132 companies operating 5,958 vehicles. And on that single day, they delivered 12,300 tons of supplies to forward elements. The record would stand for the entire operation. The impact at the front was immediate and dramatic. September 1st, 1944, near Verdun. Lieutenant Colonel George Blakesley, the same officer who'd watched Patton's tanks grind to a halt 1 week earlier, stood in 3rd Army headquarters as radio reports crackled in. 12th Corps reporting full fuel tanks. 4th Armored Division reporting ammunition resupply complete. Forward elements requesting additional pole for extended operations. Blakesley grabbed the handset. Say again your fuel status. Sir, we're topped off. Can sustain current operational tempo for 72 hours. Requesting permission to advance. For the first time in a week, Patton's tanks rolled east. The German perspective tells the story best. Wehrmacht Colonel Heinrich Aberbach, commanding German forces in the retreat, wrote in his September 3rd situation report, American mechanized forces demonstrate unlimited mobility. Supply shortages that crippled their advance 1 week ago have mysteriously resolved. Enemy divisions maintain offensive pressure regardless of distance from their supply bases. We can no longer count on logistics constraining American operational tempo. Request immediate intelligence assessment of American supply capabilities. Current observations exceed all projections by minimum 40%. In Berlin, Wehrmacht logistics staff frantically revised their estimates. Every calculation showed the Americans should be running out of fuel. Every projection indicated their advance should be slowing. But the opposite was happening. Allied forces were accelerating their offensive, pushing deeper into France with seemingly unlimited supplies. German Field Marshal Walter Model reviewed the intelligence reports with mounting frustration. Explain to me, he demanded of his staff, how the Americans are delivering tonnage that exceeds our most optimistic projections of their capabilities. What have we missed? What they'd missed was simple. American willingness to accept casualties and equipment losses in pursuit of operational success. The Red Ball Express was delivering the impossible, but at staggering cost that no German commander would have authorized. The accident rate Colonel Bradford predicted proved conservative. By mid-September, fatigue-related accidents occurred daily. Private Roosevelt Jackson survived 3 battles in North Africa only to die when his brake-deprived truck failed to negotiate a turn near Soissons. Corporal William Haynes drove, through 3 consecutive nights, fell asleep at the wheel, rolled his truck into a ravine, survived with severe injuries but never drove again. The vehicle attrition was worse. Army trucks designed for intermittent use were running 24 hours daily. Engines overheated, transmissions failed, tires shredded. By early October, abandoned vehicles lined the Red Ball Route 81 trucks in various states of disrepair between Vire and Dreux alone. Maintenance crews couldn't keep pace. But the numbers told the brutal truth. The war demanded 12,500 tons daily. The Red Ball delivered 12,000. Without it, the war stopped. With it, Allied forces pressed toward Germany. September 15th, 1944. Technical Sergeant William Ruckard, 666th Quartermaster Truck Company, completed his 23rd consecutive convoy run, 690 miles, 47 hours, 3 driver swaps without stopping. His log showed the reality of Red Ball operations. Hour 1 to 10. Loaded 5 tons ammunition at Cherbourg Depot. Departed 2,130 hours. Night. Convoy. Hour 10 to 20. Driver swap near Alençon. Coffee break cut to 5 minutes. Convoy behind schedule. Hour 20 to 30. Night driving. No lights east of Light Line. Nearly missed turn at Chartres. Navigation by memory and hope. Hour 30 to 40. Unloaded at forward depot under German artillery fire. Reloaded fuel jerrycans for return trip. German 88mm rounds landing 200 yards away. Hour 40 to 47. Return convoy. Stopped twice for roadside maintenance. Generator failed, replaced in 15 minutes by mobile maintenance team. Arrived Cherbourg 0330 hours. He ended the log entry. Never thought I'd die hauling cargo. But, if it gets ammunition to the boys at the front, worth it. The statistics from September tell the Red Ball Express story in cold numbers. Average daily tonnage delivered. 5,000 tons. Total vehicles in operation. 5,958 at peak. Average round-trip distance. 686 miles. Number of drivers. 23,000. 75% African-American soldiers. Total supplies delivered August 25, November 16, 412,193 tons. Total ton miles completed, 122 million. Personnel, casualties, deaths, injuries. Estimated 200-plus vehicle losses destroyed, abandoned, beyond repair. 400-plus. But here's the number that mattered. 0 days of frontline immobilization due to supply shortages after August 30th. American divisions that should have stopped at the French border crossed into Germany in September. Patton's Third Army that should have been stationary in Verdun reached the Moselle River. Hodges's First Army that should have waited for rail reconstruction fought into the Siegfried Line. And Wehrmacht commanders who'd counted on American logistics failing found themselves fighting an enemy that could not be stopped by mathematics. German General Siegfried Westphal wrote in his post-war memoir, "We expected the American advance to culminate from supply exhaustion. We had calculated their logistics capacity and knew they could not sustain operations 300 kilometers from their supply bases. We were correct in our calculations. But somehow, and we never understood how they delivered supplies anyway, it was as if they had rewritten the laws of military logistics. Every operational plan we developed assumed American forces would face supply constraints. Those assumptions proved catastrophically wrong." November 16th, 1944. After 83 consecutive days of non-stop operations, the Red Ball Express officially shut down. Not because it failed, because it succeeded. The port of Antwerp had been captured and cleared of mines. Rail lines from Normandy to Germany were finally operational. The emergency that created the Red Ball Express had passed. The system Gordon Haynes improvised in a French barn had accomplished exactly what it was designed to do: deliver the impossible until permanent infrastructure caught up. The final numbers were staggering: 412,193 tons delivered across 122 million ton-miles, the equivalent of hauling supplies from New York to Los Angeles 22,000 times in 83 days. But the human cost was equally staggering. An estimated 200 Red Ball drivers were killed in accidents, enemy action, or from exhaustion-related causes. Over 1,400 vehicles were destroyed or abandoned. Thousands of drivers suffered injuries. The 23,000 men who operated the Red Ball Express, 75% of them, African American soldiers relegated to non-combat service, proved more essential to victory than most combat units. Private William Scott, 3rd Quartermaster Truck Company, wrote home on November 20th. Spent 82 days driving supplies, never fired a shot, never saw the front, but met a wounded infantry sergeant at a depot who said his unit ran out of ammunition on September 8th, said a Red Ball convoy arrived just in time. He shook my hand and said, "Because of you, we came home." Don't need medals when you got that. Gordon Haynes received a Bronze Star for meritorious service in support of combat operations. The citation mentioned his innovative transportation methodology, but didn't elaborate. He was quietly promoted to full colonel, then quietly rotated back to the States in early 1945. After the war, Haynes returned to Ohio, resumed civilian trucking, and never spoke publicly about the Red Ball Express. When a military historian tracked him down in 1967 to interview him for a book, Haynes declined. "I just drove trucks," he said. "A lot of men did more than me." He died in 1971, age 63, of a heart attack. His obituary mentioned his World War II service in one sentence, but the Red Ball Express method never died. The US military studied the operation extensively. The concept of dedicated continuous operation supply routes became standard doctrine. During the Korean War, the Red Ball Express designation was revived for emergency supply operations. In Vietnam, similar convoy systems kept forward bases supplied. During Operation Desert Storm, the Desert Express convoy system moved 117,000 tons across Saudi Arabia, using principles developed in France in 1944. Even today, military logistics planners study the Red Ball Express not as a model to replicate, but as proof that impossible missions become possible when someone has the courage to ignore what textbooks say can't be done. The modern U.S. Army Transportation Corps headquarters at Fort Lee, Virginia, displays a Red Ball Express memorial. The plaque reads, "In recognition of 23,000 drivers, who proved that warfare is won not by the army with the best weapons, but by the army whose supplies actually reach the front." Below that, in smaller letters, "Sometimes the most important heroism happens at 25 miles per hour on a one-way French road." Major General Frank Ross, who approved Haynes's plan over fierce opposition, wrote in his 1946 memoir, "History remembers generals who win battles. But wars are won by sergeants who keep trucks moving, privates who load cargo at 0300 hours, and the occasional lieutenant colonel who understands that textbook solutions to impossible problems remain impossible. Sometimes you need a truck driver who's willing to ignore the textbook entirely." Gordon Haynes would have hated that quote, but he would have understood it. Because in August 1944, when every expert said the Allied advance must stop, a former Ohio truck driver with no credentials and no connections proved that sometimes the craziest idea is the only one that works. The Red Ball Express delivered 412,193 tons of supplies. But more importantly, it delivered hope to soldiers at the front who thought they'd been abandoned. It delivered fear to German commanders who thought American logistics would fail. And it delivered one undeniable truth: amateurs study tactics, professionals study logistics. But legends study the Ohio trucker who said, "We'll run them like railroads." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.